This is the first lecture in our series. It's on the activist tool, the teach-in. Now, a couple of things about the lectures. They're each limited to 15 minutes. That is a limit that YouTube puts on. And there is a way to override it, but I decided to actually try to keep my lectures short and encourage you instead to go through the material twice. Once watching me talk through it, and another time clicking through the PowerPoint on your own and doing the exercises following the video links. So this is just really an explanatory prep session for the deeper work that you're going to do individually in going through this PowerPoint. Each week I'll be bringing you 2 activist tools is kind of how I'm theming this class. I want it to be a very practical class where we think about ways to affect social change in addition to the theoretical work that we're doing with the readings. And so this specifically is about the teach-in. Now the first for those of you who don't know what a teach-in is, it's basically when you interrupt the everyday business of a university to teach, instead of about the regular subjects that are part of the credit hours, about a specific political issue. And it'll make more sense when I give you the example. The first ever teach-in was actually in 1965, and a group of University of Michigan professors threatened to actually hold a teaching strike in protest against the escalation of the war in Vietnam. And they were pretty resoundingly condemned by the University Board of Regents, the State Senate, and the Governor of Michigan, that they really, they had professional duties, they were expecting to receive a salary, and it was not their right to strike and to avoid their teaching duties. And so instead, they replaced their regular classes with the first ever teach-in, March 25th, 1965. And so a teach-in is a break from the normal where you instead discuss a pertinent political issue, in this case, the war on Vietnam. The professors felt that this was their way of meeting their obligations to the university while at the same time fulfilling their consciences in what they felt they needed to say about the war in Vietnam. And that actually caught on very quickly and led to a series of anti-war teach-ins throughout college campuses across the country. But we live in a somewhat different moment now, where we actually have more possibilities for social action online. And we're going to be discussing that a little bit later. But in this video, I want to focus on what could still be really useful about sitting down face-to-face with somebody, interrupting the normal course of business in the university to talk about an important political issue. Now, I'm going to point you towards a couple of resources. The first is a video from a 2015 teach-in, also organized at University of Michigan. The University of Michigan faculty and students organized a commemorative teach-in 50 years after the original, this time to protest, as they call it, the war on the planet. And the war on, and they're hoping that it actually catches on in the same way the original did, and that universities will take this up. Now, unlike the 1965 teach-in, where the promotional materials were mostly newspaper press releases, flyers, you can still download the original, you can still see the original flyer at the Bentley Library at University of Michigan, at the Bentley Library online, University of Michigan. But they actually made a video to hype it up. And I want you to take some time and watch this video. Take notes in whatever style you're comfortable with and used to. This video includes footage. It excerpts some footage from the original 1965 anti-war teach-in, and then also includes footage from the 2015. If you poke around a little bit more online, if you are so inclined, you can see that one of the main professors who organized the 1965 teach-in actually came back and was the keynote speaker, Professor Gorman, sociology professor. And as you go through this, and this again is in that second time through when you're coming through the information and getting a little bit more of a chance to explore, go watch the video, and take it in more slowly. I'd like you to compare and contrast the footage from 1965 and the footage from 2016. Hold on, I can move my floating head so we can see all of this. Think about really just what you see, okay? Who is in attendance? What roles do they play within the conference? And who appears to be excluded? I think if you watch very carefully, you'll come to a couple of conclusions. In the 1965 teach-in, there are really only white men speaking, but you'll notice a co-ed audience made up of both white men and white women. I think there's two important things that are going on there. One is that the men are taking up the sort of higher profile speaking roles while the women are filling out the audience, but also, if you notice in some footage, passing out the literature, handing out the buttons. Women in the anti-war movement in this time period were doing a lot of the scut work, a lot of the unglamorous things, a lot of the typing, a lot of the answering telephones, distributing flyers, not the fun, snazzy, intellectual work for which you get credit, but the unglamorous things that just need to be done. Now, who is excluded and not at the conference? Well, the University of Michigan is still an all-white campus at this time, and I'm pointing that out especially so that maybe we can think about the way that having a teach-in be located at a university is still a very exclusive kind of move. Okay, so although of course we don't have formal segregation in universities today, it's still much more difficult to get to university unless if your parents didn't go to a university. It's still much more difficult for people of color to be able to be as successful and as financially able to pay for that sort of education because of structural discrimination that still exists. So I think that that when we look at the footage, we want to think about those things. And of course, the university is designed to produce the middle class. So inherently, we're sort of looking at mostly a middle class experience. How might the teach-in be more widely available to a wider group of people? Well, I have another example that I also want to show you. And this one is Teach-In Today Part 2. It's actually 2013, so 5 years ago at this point, when the Toronto Women's City Alliance held a teach-in on the importance of gender in their city plan. And if you're like me, when I first watched this video, I thought, I don't really understand how gender could play a part in a city plan or why it would be important. But after even watching the video of the teach-in, I felt like I understood. Now, as you watch this video, I want you to take on a slightly different process. I'm going to have you take notes using a double entry system. And this is something that I use a lot when I'm working with especially videos. And so on the left column, I make two columns. And you can do this, you don't need to type anything out. You can just take a piece of paper and draw a line down the center, and that works too. And on the left side, I put down my observations. Okay, so for example, if I were observing the footage from the 1965 teach-in, I would write the speakers are white men. And then on the right side, I write my reflections. And my reflection, it could be reflections, it could be questions. That's my own space for my thoughts. So, so I observe in the video that the speakers are white men, and then in my reflections I write, well, is this merely a reflection of discrimination in the professions at the time, or did they exclude female faculty from speaking roles? And I think if you try this method of note-taking, you'll find that it's really helpful when you want to translate something that you've watched into a paper, or it also works for something that you've read, because you have the exact happenings here, but then you also have that next level thinking over here, which is really helpful. One thing, and if you look back at how you may have taken your notes for the teach-in for the first video, where I told you to take notes in just whatever way you're comfortable with, you might notice that what's actually happening and being said in the video is getting confused with your thoughts a little bit. And that makes it very difficult when you go on to write and you want to make clear distinctions between what you've actually read or observed in a source and what is actually coming from you. So this is a really good method that I recommend. Now, as you watch the Toronto Women's City Alliance teach-in, I also have a little assignment for you, which is to develop a list of best practices for a teach-in. Okay, and I'll share with you a couple of mine. First of all, plan a variety of activities. Okay, changes in pace keep your audience engaged. This is actually, I think, tips for an effective teach-in are pretty close to tips for effective teaching in general. So you can think about it that way. Another thing that I noticed is that they offer hands-on opportunities for the audience to learn about a social issue. Incorporate other voices and expert opinions and invite others to speak. You want it to be an exchange of ideas and a place where people feel like they're coming together. And then also offer opportunities for further action and involvement. If you do a really good job in a teach-in, then people are going to want to know what they can do to help, and they're going to want that program. And this is a great opportunity to prime somebody for further action, to get involved, to call their state senator, to sign a pledge, anything that, any actionable item. So it's always helpful to have an actionable item and a plan for people. Once they learn and get their consciousness raised in that way, they're going to want to do something. So I want you, after this video ends, to go back through the PowerPoint, read everything again, try the exercises, watch those 2 videos, and after you're done with all of that, meet me on the discussion boards.